Shanks.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's my pleasure to stand this afternoon and talk to the third reading of the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the Select Committee and all the hard work they put into this bill. In particular, my Deputy Chair, Hikia Parata from Mana, Tim McIndoe, who's going to speak after me from Hamilton, Tom McClay from Rotorua, and of course Chester Burrows, the Member of Parliament from Wanganui. And of course there were other members sitting on the committee that contributed as well to that committee. I'd also like to acknowledge the hard-working officials which we had here, working for us. It was a very intense bill that we looked at with many significant changes that we made to the bill. This bill took a while to get into Parliament. Labor government first started a review on residential tenancies in 2004. Unfortunately, it took them 4 years to get it to the House. So in 2008, the first bill came to the House, and then when National came into power, we looked at the bill, did a bit of a review on it, and 2010 is when it's here for its third reading. It came into my Select Committee, which I chair, last year in September 2009. So it's a pleasure to be here supporting this bill today. Obviously, the residential tenancy market has undergone significant change in the last 22 years since this bill was last looked at. In fact, a third of New Zealanders live in rental properties today, which is quite significant. It's quite a big change from 22 years ago. And so it's important that this bill was addressed, and both landlords and tenants have been asking for residential tenancies, the issues around those to be addressed and to be brought forward. So these reforms are long overdue. What this bill does is it provides a modern framework that addresses the needs of today's residential property market. The bill defines the rights and obligations of residential landlords and tenants in a clearer and much fairer way. The review of the bill identified 5 primary issues with the current Act, which we believe this bill will address. Currently, there is insufficient compliance, enforcement and dispute resolution. There is a lack of knowledge around landlord and tenancy rights and the obligations that ought to be conferred. It leaves open mixed capability for property and tenants management. It allows too variable a standard of rental housing, and it lacks the opportunity for a stable tenure of longer-term tenants. So it was important that this bill came to the House to address those issues. In light of these concerns, the bill makes positive changes. It will encourage the development of a rental market to provide stable, quality housing to those who live in rented homes. It will enable landlords to manage their properties more effectively, giving more certainty around obligations. In fact, in this bill, many of us stand here today and in our electorates, mine in Hario, which I represent for National, we have a big area of rental properties, which would surprise many people, and we also have many landlords there. So this bill is actually quite relevant to all those constituents that are in my electorate over Hario. And the committee looked at certain areas which we looked at more closely than others, which were slightly contentious. And one of those was disclosure of cleaning orders. Now, we're in a society now, unfortunately, where pee is manufactured in residential properties, and that when it is identified, it was what do we do with these cleansing orders? And the committee had a big debate around, do you have to disclose that to a tenant when they come into a property? Or is the fact that it sits on a limb actually enough for the tenants to be able to go and research it and find that there was a cleansing order on that property? So we looked at this in quite a lot of detail, and the committee came to the conclusion that would actually rather landlords went out there and got the properties cleansed and wouldn't hide the fact that maybe there had been drugs in that property for fear of never being able to let it again. So we decided not to, they wouldn't have to disclose it to the tenants in a formal way, but it would still be on the limb of the property to ensure that we've got an incentive for landlords to identify their houses if they've been used as a form of a P-lab and have got them cleansed properly. So we had confidence through the cleansing process and cleansing orders that tenants wouldn't be at risk at all. We had a big discussion on abandoned goods and what we should do around abandoned goods. We had representatives from universities, which was interesting because obviously students, especially down in Otago, are renowned for leaving their property all over the place, and once that they just pack their bag and leave the flat and leave everything there. And what can we do around that for the landlords and the tenants to make it fair and equitable for everybody? And so we put some practical solutions in there around the cost of removal and what the price of those assets, well, if you'd call them assets, would be. The couches, the cars on the front lawn, the mattresses on the front porch. You know, what do you do with those, and how do you determine whether the landlord has to store them or whether have the cost of storage, or whether they can just dispose of them. So we put some criteria around that in terms of what they could and couldn't do. And we looked at letting fees, temporary or transient accommodation. We excluded camping grounds because that was caught up. Retirement villages was caught up. We opened the legislation up a little bit to boarding houses as well to give those tenants a lot more rights. We had a great debate on many of these issues, and we feel that we've got it just right for tenants and landlords to make it fair. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Excellent.